At 04:30, the Pacific wind cut sharp across the beach at Coronado, carrying the brine of the ocean and the weight of fatigue. Floodlights bathed the obstacle course in a sterile glow, slicing through the lingering fog like search beams. 23 candidates had already crossed the final line, their soaked uniforms clinging to lean muscle, their breath heavy and rhythmic. Rachel Cruz wasn't among them. Her boots pounded the last stretch of sand with a cadence that was just off tempo, just enough to be noticed. Her body moved with control, not speed, and every breath was measured like a diver conserving oxygen. She wasn't the slowest by accident. Chief Petty Officer Donnelly checked his stopwatch, then clicked it with deliberate exaggeration. He didn't look up as he called out, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Time. 2 minutes. 47 seconds over the mark. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was full of smirks, a low scoff from somewhere near the pull-up tower, the creak of a boot shifting weight. Cruz stood at parade rest, drenched, sand packed into her cuffs, her jaw tight but neutral. She didn't blink as the chief skipped over her rank. Just Cruz. Never staff sergeant. Not here. No one told the others to avoid her. They didn't have to. Her presence interrupted the unspoken order of things. One of them, maybe Calloway or Bristow, muttered something under his breath, and a few others chuckled in that sideways kind of way that never looked like laughing. Rachel didn't move. Didn't respond. The mist thickened as the group was dismissed. Most moved toward the showers with the stiffness of exhausted bodies. But not her. She waited an extra beat, letting the others clear out first, then turned with the same quiet deliberation she'd used the whole course. Her boots made a different sound in the wet sand, heavier, slower. Inside the locker room, the air was warmer, but no more welcoming. Rachel's assigned bench was empty except for a folded towel, untouched. Around her, conversation dipped just slightly when she entered, then picked up again like nothing had happened. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody made eye contact for long. Not even the ones who didn't seem to hate her. She removed her boots without fanfare, peeling off layers like armor. Her skin was raw at the wrists where the sand had worked under her sleeves. She didn't wince. No one offered her the athletic tape. She didn't ask. Down the row, someone said loud enough to carry, "Bet she doesn't make it to Friday." Another voice, different, laughed and added, "I'll give it until Wednesday." There was a pause, just long enough to invite challenge, but none came. No one defended her. The conversation moved on. Later, in the chow hall, Rachel stood in line behind 2 other recruits. She didn't speak. The woman serving scrambled eggs glanced at her name tape longer than necessary, then scooped her portion in silence. Rachel took her tray and crossed the room to the same table she'd sat at for the last 13 days, the one by the exit, the one no one else used. Her posture never broke. Back straight, fork steady. She ate like someone who didn't need the food to taste good, who just needed calories. The chatter around her ebbed and flowed, always louder when it seemed like she might be listening, but she never looked up. Chief Donnelly stood near the wall, sipping black coffee from a metal thermos. His gaze swept the room once, landed on her, then moved on. He didn't speak to her. Hadn't since day 1. The real test hadn't been the course that morning. It had been everything after. The quiet, the jokes, the refusal to acknowledge her presence except as a benchmark of failure. She hadn't snapped, hadn't cracked, and that was what made some of them nervous. Back in the barracks, Rachel sat on her bunk alone. Her hands moved efficiently, checking gear, tightening laces, wiping mud from her canteen cap. Each motion was utilitarian, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes moved differently now, calculating. Outside, the wind picked up again. It came in off the water cold and steady, pushing through the thin glass like it belonged there. A few bunks down, a conversation drifted into the space between lockers. "You think she's got someone pulling strings? You don't get into this place without earning it." Then how'd she get in? Rachel reached under her bunk, pulled out a dry pair of socks, and laid them across the metal frame to warm. Her fingers were red from abrasion. She rotated each ankle, checked for swelling, then folded her towel and set it at the foot of her rack with military precision. The lights went out at 22:00. Someone coughed. Someone else swore softly into their pillow. Rachel lay on her back, eyes open, fixed on the darkened ceiling. Her breathing slowed, steady, silent, not restful. No one noticed the shallow bruise along her shoulder blade where a branch from the rope crawl had caught skin. No one would ask, and she wouldn't offer. Outside, the surf broke in low repetition. The course would be reset by morning, and so would she. The room smelled like sweat and dry erase marker, heavy with the closeness of 30 bodies packed into too little space. Fluorescent lights hummed above them, casting a clinical pall over the rows of recruits hunched over their notepads. Most of the class was half leaning into their desks, still recovering from the obstacle course that morning. Chief Petty Officer Blackwood stood near the whiteboard, arms folded, watching them like a man just waiting for someone to disappoint him. He tapped the marker once against his thigh before turning to face the group. They were covering basic principles of underwater demolition, scheduled to ramp up the following week. But instead of following the outline, he pivoted. He called on Cruz without preamble, voice flat, optimal placement depth for a Mark 8 Mod 1 charge against reinforced concrete pier support. The sentence landed in the middle of the room like a dropped tool. A few recruits looked up. One smirked. The manuals hadn't covered that yet. Rachel didn't pause. 32 feet, accounting for standard tidal fluctuation. Best placement is at the intersection of vertical pile and crossbeam to maximize compromise at the stress point. Her voice didn't lift or tighten. It was the same cadence she used for roll call. The pen in Lazarus's hand stopped moving. Calloway raised his eyes, slow and deliberate, watching her now. Blackwood didn't respond right away. He uncapped the marker, then turned back to the board like it hadn't happened. But he didn't write anything. Instead, he turned again. Timing delay. Safe egress window for placement team under standard clear water visibility. 90 seconds is regulation. She blinked once. 70 is possible if the divers are experienced and there's no sediment drift. The silence this time was longer. Somebody shifted in their chair behind her. Leather squeaking. A page turned too fast and tore near the binding. No one looked at Rachel directly now, but every head was just a little too still. Blackwood narrowed his eyes. Not angry, but something else. Like he'd stepped on a stair that wasn't there. He moved on, picking another recruit and tossing them a surface-level question about fuse timing. The rest of the hour passed like normal, but the balance of the room had shifted. Rachel returned to her notes as if nothing had happened. Her handwriting was blocky and small, neat without flourish. The lines she wrote didn't follow the worksheet prompts. They looked more like logs, observations, not answers. Calloway leaned over toward Bristow as the chief faced the board. She didn't guess. That wasn't a lucky hit. Lazarus didn't say anything. His gaze lingered on Cruz, trying to reconcile what he'd just seen with the person who finished the course dead last that morning. There was no moment of revelation, no whispered awe, just a spreading discomfort that hung in the air like a static charge. Cruz had answered a question they weren't supposed to be able to answer. Not yet. Not without guessing. And she hadn't guessed. When class ended, chairs scraped back and boots hit tile like punctuation. The chatter resumed, low and casual, but tighter than before. A few eyes followed Rachel as she packed her materials, moving without rush, the same way she'd done everything so far. Blackwood remained at the front of the room as they filed out. His hand tightened on the marker cap, and he looked at the door just after she passed through it. He said nothing, but his face had changed. For the first time since day one, he looked uncertain. Not of himself. Of her. The sun sat low behind the range, casting long amber streaks across the hard-packed earth. It was 15:20. Recruits lined up at the firing line in two staggered rows, their M4A1s slung across their chests, muzzles angled down, Brass from the previous rotation still littered the ground in scattered patches. Range safety officers moved methodically, eyes sharp, voices quiet. Rachel adjusted the strap across her shoulder as she stepped into place. Her weapon had already been zeroed once that morning, but something in the front post had felt off. She hadn't mentioned it. She hadn't needed to. Now, kneeling beside the bench, she reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a flat piece of paracord, 1 inch of coiled safety wire twisted at the tip. No tools allowed on this round, no exceptions. She looped the wire through the front sight and made a micro-adjustment, just enough to nudge her windage 2 clicks left. It wasn't regulation, but it wasn't against anything either. Just knowledge, quietly applied. Calloway, now 2 spots over, caught the motion. He said nothing, but he noted the tool, the way it moved in her hand. Too fast to be improvised, too smooth to be lucky. At 15:27, the firing sequence began. The cadence of calls echoed in the dry air. Load, lock, ready, fire. Rachel's posture was textbook. Elbows tight, cheek weld steady, breathing timed with her trigger press. She sent the first 3 rounds in a measured rhythm, not fast, not hesitant. The grouping landed just right of center mass, then shifted tighter by round 4. By the end of her first magazine, she'd walked the spread into a vertical line, barely 6 inches from top to bottom. Statistically average, technically sound, forgettable. The instructor passed behind each recruit with a clipboard and pencil. He didn't pause at Rachel's lane. No comment, no adjustment, just a silent check mark. She ejected the spent mag, tapped in the second, and resumed fire. 20 more rounds, none off target, none exceptional. It was the kind of shooting that didn't draw praise and couldn't be faulted. The numbers would clear her. The impression wouldn't linger. 2 benches down, Lazarus tilted his head. His grouping was looser, wider left, but he wasn't looking at his paper. He was watching her hands, the way they stayed still between bursts, the way she recentered after every reload. It wasn't normal. It wasn't bad. It was too controlled. The final ceasefire call rang at 15:39. Magazines out. Weapons clear. Stand down. Rachel stood, slung her rifle, and stepped back without speaking. Her eyes didn't sweep the line. She didn't glance at the targets. She moved like she already knew the score. The others filtered back toward the gear racks. Calloway lingered behind. Lazarus took a few extra seconds near the spotting scope, pretending to adjust it. His eyes weren't on the scope. They were on the small wire tucked back into Rachel's vest pocket. He wouldn't mention it. Not yet, but it stayed with him. Not because she shot better, but because she didn't need to. Because someone who truly wasn't ready would have shot worse. And someone trying to impress would have aimed for perfect. What she gave instead was something quieter, measured, controlled, like a page from a manual no one else had read, or maybe one she'd written herself. The lights above the pool buzzed with a low electric hum, reflecting off the still surface in pale white streaks. The water looked clean, calm, even inviting if you didn't know what came next. A few feet from the edge, Staff Sergeant Rachel Cruz stood motionless as a second-class diver cinched the cord around her wrists, pulling her arms snug behind her back. The restraints weren't cruel. They were standardized nylon cord, triple knotted, tied low enough to allow some shoulder movement but no real leverage. Her ankles were bound the same way, tight enough to hold but not cut circulation. She didn't shift or ask for a recheck. She nodded once when ready. Chief Blackwood stood near the deep end, arms crossed, voice flat, 12 feet, full immersion, standard drown-proofing rotation, surface, breathe, descend, repeat, no games, no heroics, survive the test. The last recruit had barely managed 3 full cycles before he tapped out, coughing and clawing for the edge. That had been Calloway. Now it was Rachel. 2 instructors lifted her under the arms, walked her to the edge, and dropped her into the pool like cargo. She didn't resist the fall. She sank fast, eyes open, body limp, knees slightly bent to reduce drag. The bottom was tiled and featureless. She landed softly, rolled her shoulders forward, and prepared to push. The first rise went as expected. She arched her back, used chest compression and a flick from her knees to angle up, broke the surface clean, inhaled once, slow and shallow, dropped again. On her second cycle, just as she broke the surface, someone shifted at the edge. A boot, extended just slightly past the pool's coping, brushed her shoulder. It wasn't hard. It didn't knock her off course dramatically, but it was enough. Her mouth was open. She inhaled half air, half water. No sputtering, no coughing. She sank again, chest tight, the sting of chlorinated water already curling in her throat. Recruits along the edge barely blinked. A few knew what had happened. None said a word. At the bottom, Rachel didn't fight. She let her body settle again, limbs bound, lungs tingling. Her pulse had spiked. She recognized the onset of panic, and she slowed it. A half-second exhale through her nose, shallow and controlled. She shifted her weight, rolled her shoulders again, and waited. Counted silently. She engaged a technique more common in halo jump prep than drown-proofing, hypoxia threshold training. Decrease oxygen demand by reducing tension, drop heart rate below baseline, extend time between required breaths. Most recruits had heard of it. Few had mastered it. Above her, silence spread across the deck. Instructors leaned in. One of them checked his stopwatch. 40 seconds had passed since her last breath, then a full minute. At 75 seconds, she rose. Her body moved with precision. She breached the surface calmly, took in a single, controlled inhale through her nose. No gasping, no panic. She dropped again. Calloway shifted his stance. Lazarus watched without blinking. The room was still. Her third cycle was clean. Fourth, slower. On the fifth, the instructor gave a slight nod. 2 divers slipped into the pool and moved toward her position. Rachel surfaced once more and let them guide her to the edge. They hauled her out without struggle. She lay on her side for a moment, water running down her neck, clothes heavy. No one spoke. Chief Blackwood didn't look satisfied. He didn't look impressed either. His face was unreadable. Rachel stood, nodded once, and walked away with her ankles still dripping. No towel offered. No commentary given. The stopwatch stopped at 1 minute and 54 seconds underwater, longest of the day, by far. The door clicked shut behind Rachel with the soft finality of a hospital curtain. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly in the small office, throwing sterile light across the desk where Chief Blackwood sat with a manila folder open in front of him. Commander Ellis stood by the window, hands folded behind his back, watching the parade ground like he wasn't really seeing it. Rachel stood at attention, boots aligned with the tile seam, uniform still damp from the pool. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes held still, not rigid, not tense, still. Blackwood didn't waste time. He pushed the folder across the desk without looking at her. Inside were the standard voluntary withdrawal documents, typed in triplicate, with her name already filled in. No reprimands, no failure on record. Just a quiet exit before formal dismissal. The clean way out. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a trace of something like relief on his face. You've given it a shot. No shame in stepping out. Most people wouldn't have made it this far. The tone was flat, almost rehearsed. Rachel didn't respond. She flipped open the folder, read the first page without blinking, then reached for the pen placed just beside it. Her signature came quick and clean. No hesitation. She set the pen back exactly where it had been. Ellis turned from the window, studying her now. He said nothing, only nodded once, formal and silent. Rachel closed the folder and placed it squarely in the center of the desk, her hand leaving no mark. Then she stepped back, heels together, spine straight. Blackwood finally looked up. You understand this ends your candidacy. You will not be considered again for naval special warfare. Rachel's eyes met his. Yes, sir. Any statement for the record? No, sir. Dismissed. She turned and walked out, each step measured, unhurried. The door latched behind her with the same soft click. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Ellis crossed his arms. That wasn't what I expected. Blackwood didn't answer. He picked up the folder, stared at the signature, and let out a slow breath. Then the secure line on his desk rang. The red one. Only 3 people ever called that phone. He answered. Ellis watched the color shift in his face as he listened. The voice on the other end didn't speak for long. 30 seconds. Maybe less. Blackwood straightened, like his spine had reset. The receiver lowered slowly. He didn't blink. She was never supposed to pass. The voice had said. She was sent there for something else. Ellis looked over, waiting. What does that mean? Blackwood didn't answer. He reached for the withdrawal papers and locked them in the classified drawer without a word. Outside, Rachel crossed the training yard with the same calm she'd had on day 1. Not faster, not slower. Her gear was already packed. No goodbyes, no glance over the shoulder, and no one watching her knew that she had just completed the first part of her real assignment. The air over Range Echo was dry and still, the sun low behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the valley floor. It was 1640, downrange. A small crowd of Pentagon observers stood in a cordoned-off zone behind a line of instructors and security. Their focus was on the squad-level maneuver drill unfolding across the main field. Live rounds cutting arcs through the simulated urban terrain. None of them noticed the high ridge to the northwest, 2,200 meters away. The angle was steep, nearly 30 degrees off axis from the designated safety fan. Beyond it, just below the crest, lay a single prone figure, camouflaged beneath burlap and dust. Rachel Cruz adjusted the cheek weld on her Remington 700 LRT, the stock molded to her shoulder like bone. She wore no identifying patch. Her face was partly shadowed beneath a compact boonie hat, and her position had been dug into the loose soil hours earlier. There were no spotters, no telemetry gear. Just the rifle, a small wind flag taped to a short dowel, and a notched kestrel secured beside her wrist. She watched her target through the optic. It wasn't on the range. The surveillance hub had been built into an unmarked service trailer tucked behind a false shed near the edge of the operations compound. It ran passive data collection on every signal within 10 square kilometers. It wasn't listed on the visitor maps, but she had seen it in motion once. Weeks earlier, when no one was supposed to be looking. The suppressor on her rifle was hand-lathed, non-serialized, matte black. The cartridge was a custom 300 Win Mag round loaded with a 220-grain Sierra Match King, tested for flight stability at high altitude. She made a single half-breath, let it out slowly, then paused just before the exhale finished. The shot broke with a crack muffled by the terrain and the suppressor's low signature. It echoed once against the stone and vanished. The observers on the field didn't notice. Not yet. The round struck the surveillance hub's upper panel through the vent slats. An entry no wider than a soda can. A second later, the fans inside spun down, the signal blinked, and the recording system failed. No explosion, no smoke, just silence. Rachel remained still. She cycled the bolt quietly, then waited. No secondary targets. No need for follow-up. She lowered her eye from the optic, packed a fistful of loose earth over the spent casing, and folded the shooting mat with practiced speed. The rifle broke down into its case in less than 90 seconds. She moved with care, minimizing her silhouette. Below, one of the instructors glanced toward the range tower. Confused. A comms tech was checking a failed signal from the data trailer. There was no visible damage from their side, just a flat line on the network monitor. By the time anyone traced the anomaly, Rachel was already moving across the draw. She stepped lightly, boots muted in the shale, the rifle case strapped across her shoulders under the ghillie net. Her exit route ran below radar coverage, using dead zones she'd studied years before. Not recent recon. Memory. On the range, the drill continued. Observers applauded a clean breach on the final building. Cameras rolled. The surveillance data would later be flagged as corrupted, time-stamped exactly 1 second before the round made contact. Only one man would piece it together, and by then, she'd be 3 counties gone. The lights in the command briefing room buzzed faintly overhead. It was 07:15. A pot of burned coffee sat untouched in the corner. 4 instructors, including Chief Blackwood and Commander Ellis, waited around the long steel table, shoulders square, hands still. No one spoke as the civilian advisor entered. He didn't wear a name tag, no rank, just a clean-cut suit, and the kind of face you forget 5 minutes after seeing it. He set down a slim black folder, then looked each man in the eye before speaking. "You've asked for clarity. Here it is. Her name is Rachel Cruz. She holds no active service record in the conventional system because her record is sealed under Title 10, Section 3015. What you experienced was part of a controlled audit, one designed to test institutional performance under embedded uncertainty. Her goal wasn't to graduate. It was to listen, to observe, to collect failure points in culture and command." No one reacted right away. Ellis shifted in his chair, fingers tightening just once on the armrest. Blackwood didn't move. His jaw set hard, but his eyes didn't flinch. The advisor continued, tone even. Cruz was deployed through Joint Special Operations Command with authorization from SOCOM. She's completed over 30 low-visibility assignments across multiple theaters. Most of her operations are redacted beyond your level of clearance. But we can say this: she's worn no uniform with rank since 2016. Every mission since has been unmarked, all under objectives related to cultural resilience and mission drift inside elite structures. He opened the folder. Inside was a single brass casing, 215 etched along the base. It lay next to a classified summary sheet listing 4 geo-coordinates and 3 dates. One of them matched the day Range Echo's signal hub went dark. She didn't fire for training. She fired to confirm a blind spot, and we let her. One instructor leaned forward, ready to speak, then stopped. It wasn't fear holding them quiet. It was recalibration, the weight of finding out they'd never been the ones in control. The advisor flipped the page. "We chose your class for a reason. Records showed clear patterns, decisions made on gut, legacy bias, institutional habit. What she showed us wasn't just about how she was treated. It was about how training reacts when someone won't play the expected role." Ellis spoke first, voice low. "She signed the withdrawal." She did, and in doing so, she triggered the final step. Her mission was never to finish. It was to see what happens when someone like her decides not to. Blackwood's eyes stayed on the casing. His voice didn't change. "Why now?" "Because the next phase of selection doctrine will be built on what we just learned. And because what you teach next, how you adapt from here, will say more about this command than any graduation rate ever has." No one clapped. No one defended themselves. There were no apologies. Only the quiet realization that something permanent had just shifted. The advisor stood, closed the folder, and left the casing on the table. "She earned that," he said, then walked out. They sat in silence for another full minute. Just the sound of the vent fans spinning in the ceiling and the soft hum of fluorescent light. Ellis looked down at the shell casing, still and small in the center of the table. "What she did," he said quietly, "wasn't about showing us she could be one of them. It was about showing us what we've been missing. The sand on the range looked the same, but the pacing was different. It was 06:05. Morning light caught the edge of the bleachers as a new group of recruits took their positions along the firing line. Their uniforms were clean, boots tight-laced, breathing controlled. None of them knew they were part of a postscript. From a distance, just beyond the shade of the control tower, Rachel Cruz stood with her hands in her pockets. She wore no rank, no name tape. The wind moved softly across the field, stirring dust without sound. She watched as Chief Blackwood stepped between the stations. His voice was lower now, less clipped. He nodded when a recruit's self-corrected grip paused longer after each demonstration. A few feet behind him, Calloway adjusted a rifle sling on a nervous candidate's shoulder. He didn't bark the correction. He just pointed, then moved on. His boots were lighter now. His eyes tracked more than just compliance. The targets reset. A new drill began. Rachel didn't shift her weight. She stood still, absorbing the rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And in places where once there had been tension, there was space now. A little room for something to grow. At 06:17, a UH-60 with no markings touched down just outside the perimeter. Its rotors washed a loose halo of dust across the edge of the training yard. No one looked toward it. They had drills to finish, instructions to follow. It didn't matter who came or went anymore. The system had started learning to stand without watching itself. Rachel turned from the line and walked toward the bird. She carried a single hard case, matte black, no labels. Inside was the brass casing marked 215, polished along one side, slightly worn along the rim. It rested in the foam cutout like a coin pressed into a palm. She reached the helicopter as the crew chief gave her a nod. No questions. No manifest. She climbed in, set the case at her feet, and pulled the harness across her lap. The door slid shut with a clean metallic pull. As the rotors lifted them above the ridge, the range grew smaller. The recruits below kept moving. The drills didn't pause. Rachel leaned back against the seat. Her breathing stayed steady. Nothing had ended, but something had shifted. And in the quiet between missions, even shadows left a trace.